The boardroom smelled the same. That was the first thing Oscar Dixon noticed as he stepped off the elevator on the 14th floor of Dixon and Partners Holdings. The faint scent of mahogany polish and old ambition. The same smell that had clung to his father's suit jacket every evening when he came home. Oscar had buried his nose in that jacket as a boy, convinced that the smell was what success felt like. Now, standing in the hallway that bore his family's name in faded gold lettering, he was not so sure. He did not announce himself. He never did anymore. He was dressed plainly. A charcoal gray jacket, dark trousers, no tie. Nothing that screamed wealth. Nothing that whispered it either. That was intentional. Oscar Dixon had spent the last 3 years learning that the most powerful thing a man could wear was invisibility, and he had mastered the art completely. He paused near the glass partition and looked in. The boardroom was full. Stephen Harris sat at the head of the table. His father's chair. Leaning back with the casual confidence of a man who believed he had already won. His silver cufflinks caught the light as he gestured broadly, laughing at something Jermaine Watson had said. Jermaine sat 2 seats down, nodding along like the loyal shadow he had always been, his round face stretched into a practiced smile. Around them, 7 other board members filled the remaining chairs, all of them looking relieved, or eager, or both. Oscar watched them for exactly 12 seconds. Then he turned and walked back toward the elevator. He had seen enough. 3 years ago, Oscar Dixon had been a different man. He had been the kind of man who trusted people. Who believed that loyalty was something you could earn through kindness and honesty. His father, Edmund Dixon, had raised him that way. Character is currency, Oscar, the old man used to say, usually while they sat on the back porch sharing a pot of tea neither of them particularly liked but both pretended to enjoy. A man who guards his character guards everything. Edmund Dixon had built Dixon and Partners from a single import license and a second-hand truck into a mid-sized logistics and supply chain company worth just under $40 million. It had taken him 31 years. He had done it without cutting corners, without burying competitors, and without ever once asking Oscar to sacrifice his own dreams for the business. That generosity had cost Edmund everything. When Edmund suffered his stroke 2 years and 8 months ago, he had been mentally sharp enough to survive the initial crisis but physically weakened to the point that the board, led by Stephen Harris, who had served as CFO for 11 years and whom Edmund had called the son I never had to worry about, had petitioned for an emergency restructuring of company governance. Edmund, still recovering, had trusted Stephen to handle things temporarily. Temporarily had lasted 2 years. By the time Edmund Dixon passed quietly in his sleep on a Tuesday morning in March, Stephen Harris had positioned himself as acting CEO, restructured the shareholding arrangement in ways that diluted Oscar's inheritance claim, and begun quiet conversations with 3 different acquisition firms about selling the company outright. Oscar had found out about the sale not from a lawyer, not from a board member, but from Bertha Bell. His father's personal secretary for 19 years. She had called him at 6 in the morning, her voice barely above a whisper, and said 7 words that changed everything. "They are selling Edmund's company. You need to come." He was sitting in his rented car now, 3 blocks from the Dixon and Partners building, staring at nothing in particular. His phone buzzed. Devon Watchman's name lit up the screen. "You went in, didn't you?" It was not a question. "Just to look," Oscar said. "And?" "Harris is already celebrating." Oscar exhaled slowly. "The man is sitting in my father's chair like he built it himself." Devon was quiet for a moment. "The acquisition papers get signed Friday." "That is 4 days, Oscar." "I know. Blackwell Capital confirmed this morning. They think they are buying from the current board." Devon paused deliberately. "They do not know the current board does not actually have the authority to sell. Because they do not know that you quietly acquired controlling interest 6 weeks ago through 3 separate shell companies." Oscar said nothing. "They have no idea," Devon continued, "that the man buying their stolen company is the son they tried to erase. Outside the car window, the Dixon and Partners sign caught the afternoon sun and glowed faintly gold, the same color it had been for as long as Oscar could remember. He thought about his father's voice. Character is currency, Oscar. Let them celebrate, Oscar said quietly. Friday is coming. Before we move on, we want to ask you something. What do you think Oscar should do first when Friday arrives? Confront Stephen publicly, or let the signing happen and reveal himself at the very last moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Bertha Bell's office was tucked at the far end of the 14th floor, sandwiched between a storage room and a rarely used conference space. The kind of location that told you exactly how much the new administration valued institutional memory. The nameplate on her door was the original brass one Edmund had ordered himself, and nobody had bothered to replace it, which Bertha took as either an oversight or a small mercy. Oscar knocked twice and entered without waiting. She was standing at her filing cabinet, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, a thick manila folder pressed against her chest like a shield. She was 63 years old, small-framed, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of steady eyes that had seen too much to be easily rattled. When she saw Oscar, something in her face broke open. Just briefly. Before she composed herself. "You look like your father," she said. "People keep telling me that." She set the folder on her desk and gestured to the chair across from her. Oscar sat. She remained standing, which he understood was her way of maintaining control of the conversation. "How much do you know?" she asked. "Enough. But I need the documentation." The original governance charter, the shareholding amendments Harris filed 18 months ago, and any board minutes from the restructuring meetings. Bertha opened the manila folder without hesitation and slid it across the desk. "I have been holding these for 8 months, she said quietly. "Edmund asked me to keep copies of everything. I think he knew, toward the end, that something was not right. He never said it directly. But he asked me to keep copies." Oscar looked down at the documents. His father's signature appeared on the first page of the original charter. Bold, slightly forward-leaning, exactly as he remembered it. "There is something else," Bertha said. He looked up. Stephen Harris did not act alone. She folded her hands on the desk. Jermaine Watson drafted the shareholding amendments. But the person who introduced Harris to the Blackwell Capital contact, the person who made this acquisition possible, was someone Edmund trusted even more than Stephen. Oscar waited. "Maria Haskins," Bertha said. "Your father's corporate attorney." The name landed like a stone dropped in still water. Oscar felt the ripple move through him but kept his face calm. Maria Haskins. He had met her exactly once, briefly, at his father's 65th birthday dinner 2 years before the stroke. He remembered dark eyes, a measured smile, and a firm handshake. He remembered thinking she seemed like someone who never said anything by accident. "Are you certain?" he asked. "I have her emails," Bertha said simply. She reached into the folder and produced a separate sealed envelope. "I found them in Edmund's private server archive. He gave me the access code the week before he passed. I do not think it was an accident that he did." Oscar took the envelope. He did not open it yet. "Why are you telling me all of this now?" he asked. Bertha Bell looked at him for a long moment. "Because your father spent 31 years building something honest," she said. "And I am not going to sit here and watch dishonest people profit from it." Oscar was still holding the envelope when he walked into the lobby downstairs and nearly collided with a woman coming through the revolving door. She caught herself against the door frame. He stepped back. They looked at each other. She was carrying a leather document satchel and wearing a navy blazer, her dark hair pulled back precisely. Her expression shifted from surprise to recognition to something more carefully neutral. All within the space of about 2 seconds. "Maria Haskins." "Mr. Dixon," she said. Her voice was even, professional. "I did not know you were in the building." I was visiting an old friend, Oscar said. Something flickered behind her eyes. She glanced at the envelope in his hand and then back at his face. Are you in town for long? Just until Friday, he said. He watched her absorb that. Watched her decide how much it meant. Then I hope your visit is productive, she said, and moved past him toward the elevator. Oscar stood in the lobby for a moment after she was gone, the sealed envelope in his hand, turning over what he had just seen in her eyes. Because beneath the professionalism and the careful neutrality, he had caught something unexpected. It had not looked like guilt. It had looked like fear. Devon Watchman was the kind of man who could find information the way other people found loose change. Casually, almost accidentally, and always in useful denominations. He was 41, lean, with a shaved head and the permanent expression of someone mentally running 3 calculations simultaneously. He and Oscar had met during Oscar's time working at a private equity firm in London, where Devon had served as lead investigator on 2 corporate fraud cases. When Oscar had called him 8 weeks ago with the outline of a plan, Devon had listened to the whole thing without interrupting and then said simply, I am in. But we do this clean. They met at a coffee shop 6 blocks from the Dixon building, Devon already at a corner table with 2 cups and a laptop open. I ran the name, Devon said as Oscar sat down. Maria Haskins. Corporate attorney, 15 years in practice, specializing in mergers and acquisitions. Clean record, no disciplinary flags. But she had a significant personal debt crisis 4 years ago. Medical bills. Her mother. She restructured everything quietly, paid it all off within 18 months. Where did the money come from? That is the interesting part. Devon leaned forward. It came from a consultancy fee. Paid by a holding company that, if you trace it back through 4 layers of registration, connects directly to Stephen Harris's personal investment portfolio. Oscar wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. Harris paid her debts. And in return, Devon said, she delivered him the legal framework to restructure the company's governance without triggering Edmund's protective clauses. She found the loophole, Oscar. She built the door they walked through. Oscar was quiet for a moment. But she seemed frightened this morning. Not guilty. Frightened. Devon looked at him. There is a difference. There can be. Oscar stared at the table. What if she did not know how far Harris intended to take it? What if she opened the door and then could not close it? That is a generous interpretation of someone who helped steal your inheritance. Maybe. Oscar picked up his coffee. Or maybe it is a useful one. Devon studied him. You are thinking about flipping her. I am thinking that Stephen Harris and Jermaine Watson have covered their tracks well. But Maria Haskins is the one who built the legal architecture. If she is frightened, it is because she knows exactly how exposed she is. Oscar set the cup down. And frightened people make choices. That evening, Oscar's phone rang from an unknown number. He almost did not answer. But something, instinct, or perhaps his father's voice in the back of his head reminding him that information never knocks twice, made him pick up. Mr. Dixon. It was Maria Haskins. Her voice was lower than it had been in the lobby, stripped of its professional polish. I need to speak with you. Not here. Not anywhere near that building. All right, Oscar said carefully. There are things you do not know about Friday's signing, she said. Things that affect you directly. Stephen Harris is not just selling the company. He has structured the acquisition in a way that permanently terminates any future legal claim you could make to the Dixon estate assets, including properties your father held outside the company umbrella. Oscar felt something cold move through him. I helped him build that structure, Maria said, and her voice cracked slightly on the word helped, like the word itself had an edge. I did not know that was what it was for. Not at first. By the time I understood, I was already too deep inside it to walk away cleanly. She paused. But I have documentation. Everything. And I am willing to hand it over, if you are willing to hear me out. Oscar looked out his hotel window at the city lights below. Tell me where, he said. Halfway through the story now. Do you think Maria is truly guilty, or is there something deeper going on? Tell us what you think in the comments below. They met at a small restaurant on the east side of the city. The kind of place with low lighting and tables spaced far enough apart that conversation stayed private. Maria was already there when Oscar arrived, seated in the back corner, her document satchel on the chair beside her. She had ordered water and not touched it. She looked different away from the building. Less armored. There were shadows under her eyes that suggested she had not been sleeping well, and when Oscar sat down across from her, she met his gaze with something raw and complicated that he was not sure how to name. I want to say something before anything else, she said. Go ahead. I am sorry. She said it without preamble, without the cushioning qualifications that people usually wrapped around apologies to protect themselves. I made choices that harmed you and harmed your father's legacy. I understood what I was doing legally. I told myself the moral dimension was someone else's responsibility. She paused. That was a lie I told myself because I needed money and I was scared. It does not excuse it. Oscar said nothing for a moment. He was thinking about his father, about the back porch and the tea they did not really like. About character is currency. Tell me what you know about Friday, he said. Maria opened her satchel and placed a series of documents on the table. She walked him through them methodically. The acquisition structure Stephen had designed, the asset termination clauses buried in the sale agreement's appendices, the way Harris had used Jermaine Watson to create a paper trail that would make it appear the board had acted with full legal authority. He has been planning this for longer than you think, Maria said. The restructuring after your father's stroke was not opportunistic. Stephen had been preparing for it for at least 2 years before Edmund got sick. He was waiting for a moment of vulnerability. Oscar looked at the documents. My father trusted him. I know. Maria's voice was quiet. Edmund spoke about Stephen like he was family. Stephen used that. She hesitated, then added, he used me too. I am not saying that to excuse myself. I made the choice to be usable. But I want you to understand the full picture. Oscar looked up from the papers. Why are you doing this now? What changed? Maria was quiet for a long moment. She turned her water glass slowly on the table. Stephen called me this morning. After he saw you in the lobby. She looked up. He told me that if anything went wrong with Friday's signing, if any documentation surfaced that complicated the deal, he would make sure the liability landed entirely on me. He has emails he has edited. Altered timestamps. He has been preparing a version of events where I acted alone. Her jaw tightened. I spent 4 years believing he was someone I could trust. Apparently that was the second worst mistake of my life. What was the first? Oscar asked. Letting him convince me that what we were doing was just business, she said. Oscar spread everything on the hotel room desk when he got back, Devon beside him, both of them working through the documents Maria had provided until past midnight. Susan Corneliu, Stephen's wife, who had served unwittingly as the registered director of one of the shell companies Harris used, appeared in the paperwork in ways that were clearly accidental rather than conspiratorial, her signature on documents she had almost certainly never read. Oscar noted it and set it aside. Susan was a complication, not a culprit. By 1 in the morning, they had what they needed. This is enough, Devon said, leaning back. Combined with what Bertha provided and the shareholding documentation from your acquisition, this dismantles Harris's entire position. The board meeting Friday becomes the moment everything unravels for him. Publicly, legally, and completely. Oscar stared at the desk covered in papers. His father's name appeared on document after document. In signatures, in company titles, in asset listings. Edmund Dixon, who had built everything from honesty and patience and 31 years of showing up. He did not deserve any of this, Oscar said quietly. Devon put a hand briefly on his shoulder. No. He did not. But you are about to make it right. Oscar arrived at Dixon and Partners at 8:45 on Friday morning. He was dressed differently today. Dark suit, no deliberate invisibility. He had spent 3 years learning to disappear when disappearing was useful, and now that chapter was finished. He carried a leather briefcase. His father's, retrieved from storage, the brass clasps worn smooth from decades of use. Devon was already positioned in the lobby with their legal team. 3 attorneys from a firm Harris had never heard of, each carrying their own briefcases. Bertha Bell was standing near the elevator bank, her expression composed and her conscience finally at ease. Maria Haskins had arrived separately and was waiting in a side conference room as agreed, her own attorney present. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Oscar rode the elevator to the 14th floor. The boardroom went silent when he walked in. Not the polite, momentary silence of someone unexpected entering a meeting. A deeper silence. The kind produced by the sudden intrusion of reality into a room full of comfortable assumptions. Stephen Harris was at the head of the table. His silver cufflinks caught the light exactly as they had 3 days ago. His expression shifted from surprise to something he immediately tried to convert into authority. Oscar, he said, with the practiced warmth of a man who had spent years performing sincerity. We were not expecting you. This is a closed board session. I know, Oscar said. He set his father's briefcase on the table. I called it. Harris blinked. I am sorry. As the controlling shareholder of Dixon and Partners Holdings, Oscar said, his voice measured and clear, I have the authority to call an emergency board session under Article 7 of the original governance charter. Which, as it happens, supersedes the amended version your team filed 18 months ago. Because that amendment was executed without the required quorum and is therefore legally void. The room was absolutely still. Jermaine Watson's face had gone the color of old paper. That is not, Harris started. I acquired controlling interest in this company 6 weeks ago, Oscar continued, through a series of acquisitions structured to maintain confidentiality until a strategically appropriate moment. Blackwell Capital has been notified this morning that the sale agreement they were preparing to sign today is invalid. They are not, and never were, negotiating with parties who had the authority to sell. He looked at Stephen Harris directly. Steadily. Without anger. Which was, he had decided, the most devastating way to look at a man who had been expecting an emotional confrontation and had prepared his defenses accordingly. You sold my father's company, Oscar said quietly. You just did not know you were selling it to me. What followed was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. There were no raised voices, no overturned chairs. Harris called his attorney. Jermaine Watson said nothing for the remainder of the meeting, which Oscar thought was perhaps the most honest thing the man had ever done. The board members who had been complicit shifted uncomfortably. Those who had simply been uninformed looked stunned and then relieved when Oscar made clear he had no interest in punishing the innocent. The documentation was reviewed. The legal team confirmed the validity of Oscar's position. By 11:15, Stephen Harris had been formally removed from his acting CEO role pending a full legal review of his conduct during Edmund Dixon's incapacitation. 2 weeks after Friday, Oscar sat in his father's office for the first time. He had avoided it until now. Not from grief exactly, but from a sense that he needed to earn the right to sit there, needed the business of reclamation to be finished before he allowed himself the quieter business of remembrance. The office was largely as Edmund had kept it. Bookshelves along one wall, a broad desk facing the window that looked out over the city, a framed photograph on the corner of the desk showing a much younger Edmund Dixon standing beside a second-hand truck with a hand-painted company logo on the door. Oscar sat in the chair and looked at the photograph for a long time. He thought about 31 years of honesty. About trust extended to the wrong people and the particular kind of heartbreak that produced. About the fact that his father had, in his final weeks, quietly ensured that Bertha Bell had everything she needed to expose what had been done. Not in bitterness, but in faith that someone would eventually show up to use it correctly. He knew I would come, Oscar thought. He left me the tools and trusted me to find them. The legal proceedings against Stephen Harris and Jermaine Watson moved efficiently, supported by the documentation Maria Haskins had provided. Harris faced charges related to breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent misrepresentation, and corporate malfeasance. Jermaine Watson cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge, which Oscar had neither encouraged nor opposed. Susan Corneliu was formally cleared of any involvement. Oscar had ensured that was established early and unambiguously. She had been a signature on a document, nothing more, and she had 3 children and a life that did not deserve to be upended by her husband's choices. Bertha Bell was offered a role as Director of Institutional Memory. A title Oscar had invented specifically for her, because no existing title adequately described what she was to the company or what she had done for it. She had laughed when he told her the title. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and it sounded like something long held being carefully released. Devon was leaving on a Thursday morning, his work complete, a handshake in the Dixon and Partners lobby that lasted longer than handshakes usually do. "Your father would have liked watching that boardroom moment," Devon said. "He would have found it overly dramatic," Oscar replied. "He would have found it overly dramatic and then told the story at every dinner party for the next 5 years." Oscar smiled. It was the realest smile he had produced in longer than he could precisely remember. Maria Haskins submitted her cooperation fully to the legal process and faced a professional review that resulted in a formal censure and a 2-year suspension of her practice license. She had accepted both without appeal. Oscar had not intervened in either direction. She came to see him once, about 10 days after Friday, not at the office but at the coffee shop around the corner from it. She had asked for 15 minutes and he had given her 30 because he was curious about what she would do with the time. What she did was set a small envelope on the table and push it toward him. "I had no right to keep this," she said. "It was in the estate documents I was managing. It is addressed to you." Oscar looked at the envelope. His name was on the front in his father's handwriting. He did not open it at the table. He waited until he was back in the office, in his father's chair, the city spread out behind him through the window. Then he opened it carefully and read what Edmund Dixon had written in the unsteady but determined handwriting of a man who knew his time was shortening. "Oscar, if you are reading this, then Bertha found you, and you found your way back. I knew you would. You always had better instincts than you gave yourself credit for. I want you to know that I am not angry at the people who took advantage of my trust. Anger is expensive and I have never been good at wasting resources. What I want you to know is this. What I built was never really about the company. The company was just the shape that the real thing took. The real thing was integrity. Discipline. Showing up honestly every day even when dishonesty would have been easier. That is what I am leaving you. Not the building, not the trucks, not the contracts. Guard your character, son. Everything else can be rebuilt. With all my love, Dad." Oscar sat with the letter for a long time. Outside, through the window, the city moved in its ordinary way. Unhurried and indifferent to the particular moment of a man reading his father's words in his father's chair and understanding, perhaps for the first time with his whole self rather than just his mind, what it meant to inherit something that mattered. The Dixon and Partners sign on the building across the street caught the afternoon light and glowed gold. Oscar folded the letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer of the desk. Then he opened his laptop and began the work of rebuilding what honesty looked like when it had room to grow. Oscar chose to rebuild rather than simply reclaim. What does rebuilding something broken mean to you, in business, in family, or in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And that, dear friends, is the story of Oscar Dixon. A son who did not come back with rage, but with patience, strategy, and the unshakable values his father planted in him long before the world tried to take everything away. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. It truly means the world to us that you spent your time here, and we hope this story stirred something in you. Whether it reminded you of someone you love, a battle you have fought, or a truth you needed to hear today. If this story moved you, encouraged you, or simply kept you hooked from beginning to end, please take a second right now and hit that like button. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to a channel like ours. Drop a comment below and tell us which moment hit you the hardest. Was it Oscar walking into that boardroom? His father's letter? We genuinely read every single comment and we love hearing from you. And if you have not already, please subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. We are just getting started, and trust us, what is coming next is going to be even more powerful than what you just watched. Stay with us. The best stories are still ahead.